I choose to be an AI optimist, right? And I think that's a choice that we get to make. I haven't worked in talent and technology for a long, long time. I don't see it as a replacement to jobs. I see it as an opportunity to reskill and upskill themselves and put themselves in better positions to compete.
I think a lot of my fears come from the natural human fear of change and progression and how this is going to make so many creative jobs obsolete because it's going to be so much more cost effective for giant corporations to assign this kind of work to AI and machines.
Just doesn't do the same thing that a real person can do. And maybe
Mhm.
that's because the emotion is often out of it.
Yeah.
And the compassion and sometimes the subtleties and nuances that are needed in human communication to make a real difference.
This is AI Goes to College, a new podcast about artificial intelligence in higher education and beyond.
I'm Professor Sarah Stuart, and you're listening to the final episode of AI Goes to College, an FSCJ podcast sponsored by the AI Advisory Council. What you just heard are the voices of students and faculty offering a glimpse into how AI is starting to shape their experiences. In this episode, we're looking at what's really happening across our campuses. From computer science to the hospitality program, this episode brings together voices and stories that reflect the evolving role of AI at the college. Over the past year, we've been documenting our journey with artificial intelligence while connecting to other colleges and workforce leaders around the country. 1 year ago, we sat down at this exact location and began unraveling the impact of this technology.
I think it's absolutely pertinent here. I know I said it in thinking about my syllabus for the fall already. I'm setting aside a separate day outside the syllabus day just to talking about here's how you can use AI, here's how you can't use it with examples. Because students are going to be receiving a lot of different messages, which could lead to possible confusion. It's going to lead to confusion. Students are already expressing to me that they're confused. So you just need to be as straightforward as possible. That said, I think Haley potentially points the way in her response for how instructors can go about perhaps assessing AI. What she's alluding to is process work. How we get from point A to point B, it's that in-between space that where AI is a vehicle or a tool to get us there. And that's really, if we're thinking like that, there's, I think, some possible means of assessments that we can use.
That was the voice of Scott Kaysen, a humanities professor here at the college. The conversation set the stage for the upcoming school year, with questions about ethical use and the future of AI in classwork. We're going to check in with him today and see how things evolved. But first, I want to do a very English professor thing by bringing in an old literary reference. So when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in 1818, the Western world was going through a transformation not too different from the tech revolution we're experiencing today. It was the dawn of the industrial age, and machines were replacing human labor. So the Luddites were attacking manufacturers in protest. Some historians believe that the new gig economy and AI technology are stirring up similar unrest around jobs. And that's where we come in as educators, to explore what this all means for higher education and job training. So this novel, which we studied last semester in a lit class here, it wasn't just a Gothic tale. It continues to reveal an important universal question. What happens when human ingenuity creates something beyond our control? Historian Brian Merchant points out in his book, Blood in the Machine, that the boundaries around technology were being violently contested even in Shelley's time. Well, 2 centuries later, we return to this story as our campus navigates its own modern Prometheus moment. Chapter 1, Early Adopters. To understand how AI is transforming our institution and the way we teach and we train, let's begin by hearing from Rusty Gardner. He's an AI enthusiast and the Executive Director of Enterprise Information Systems at FSCJ.
I think where the college is unique as to other businesses is we have these two sides. We have this educational side to where what products can we use or not use for teaching and for learning and for our students. And that's a huge part of what we talk about and what a lot of our time is spent.
Right.
But then on the other side, we have this functional side of all these people that work at our institution that are using AI every day in their work, right? And we did a survey recently, and 300 people answered the survey, and 40% of them are using AI like almost weekly. But the majority of the people use ChatGPT in the institution, followed by Copilot.
Okay.
I'm there's so many out there. I keep playing with all the different ones. I end up usually back with ChatGPT because it's kind of like Mac versus Microsoft, right? It's just what you grew up with. What did you start playing with at the beginning? So it feels more comfortable. But so I'm thinking what we're really having to do is kind of focus or shift how we work with the institution and see it as two separate things: a teaching learning side and then a functional side. And then on the functional side, how do we help people use it in their job correctly, keep it secure, have them use it ethically? Because for the most part, and I don't know how it is in other institutions, but I know how it is here, we don't talk about it a lot. Some of us talk about it a whole lot, but in general, it's almost like people are embarrassed to say they use it, and they'll kind of whisper, well, I use ChatGPT.
So it seems like many of us at the college are using it to some degree, but that a lot of us don't necessarily feel confident in its use, or we may still feel like it's cheating. So it can feel like a huge risk for the individual user, which is something every institution, educational or not, has been dealing with. But even more significant to those on the front lines of teaching are the deeper questions about how these tools are going to reshape the learning experience itself. One reason they may put off using it altogether, while others are fully embracing it. So let's hear from Professor Scott Kaysen again, 1 year later. He argues that AI enhances, rather than replaces, traditional forms of critical thinking. He talks about how he's building and using AI agents to transform the Socratic seminar in-person classes.
My name is Scott Kaysen. I am in the Humanities Department at South Campus primarily. I teach a range of courses within our department: world religions, the humanities prehistory, the 15th centuries, essentially ancient cultures class. And then, of course, several different topics in humanities classes, really range across the board. Comic books and American culture is one of those. Art of biblical narratives, another one of those as well. The Wednesday class there is a large group discussion. It's essentially a Socratic seminar. But I wanted students to engage with that lecture and reading content before coming to class to really deepen their degree of engagement with material. My initial thought was to use ChatGPT, but by midsummer, Poe.com had released their own kind of hub of various LLMs.
Like a suite.
Yes, a suite. Absolutely. That's a great way to describe it. The chance to make public access agents of their own, where you could essentially, as an instructor, find the LLM with the highest token amount, and you could essentially build that into your own agent and make that publicly accessible. So that's essentially what I did. I made one for my world religions class, another for my humanities prehistory class. Going into the class then, I trained students on how to use the LLM, how to prompt it. I actually gave them prompts to get the conversation moving along. And then essentially that became the assignment each week, due the night before our Socratic seminars.
So how did each of the students access this? Did they access Poe, or did they just access your agent? And how did that work, just kind of technically?
Yeah, so the agent is built into Poe. So they just go to Poe.com and they will look up my agents. One is, I think, called Culture Stage. And the other is entitled Belief Bot. So they look that up, they see it, they can click on it. It's already been pre-trained in terms of, and I have to take their feedback in terms of, sometimes we'll say, well, it's doing this or saying this. So I can just go back in and train it over and over. But anyway, they can go in and once they say hello, it says, oh, are you here to have a conversation about this? And the conversation gets going from there.
Yeah. So you've seen a huge change in your conversations,
Absolutely.
right? In your discussions in class.
Yeah. So last spring, I think our discussions would maybe range for about 30 minutes or so. Now they go for about an hour. And that just speaks to the level of depth. I can also say, I try to balance things out. So I used to do, and this is probably a carryover from COVID, after we had our Wednesday class, I'd open up an online quiz. I wanted to see what student was actually, what they actually knew. So I've now reserved the last 15 minutes of classes on Wednesday to give them a quiz in class. And these are not easy quizzes, by the way. The quiz scores now are higher than they were previously. And AI, I think, is quite different in the sense it cuts across all facets of our discipline. It's something that our students are going to be going into.
Yeah.
I do believe that it's absolutely essential here that some kind of a ethics awareness, use AI should be foundational. We're already seeing some universities and colleges doing that, establishing that pretty early on. The degree of depth that I've seen in terms of the conversations have gotten better as well because the chatbot is using has enhanced quite a bit.
Chapter 2, Skeptics. So Scott was addressing what so many educators have been struggling with this year. How can we best provide an ethical framework around AI and relay that to students? The concerns about the use of AI run pretty deep here at the college, so let's turn to the darker side of things. Within our writing department, the biggest issue is about what AI writing tools mean for the learning process itself. Even as an AI optimist myself, I'm also a skeptic, and I've been listening closely to what my colleagues are saying. So before we hear from the next guest, allow me to voice one of the greatest concerns for developing writing skills. I think it really boils down to a loss of the cognitive struggle that makes writing so valuable as a writing tool. When students work through an argument paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, word by word, they're not just producing text, they're developing their thinking. That process of getting stuck, working through conceptual problems and revising repeatedly is where the actual learning happens. So AI can generate well-structured essays, as we all know, but it bypasses the mental workout, which is what makes writing worth doing at all in the first place. It's like having someone else work out for you and expecting to get fit. So if inexperienced students skip any of these steps in the process, they inevitably skip the learning itself. At best, we could be creating a generation that can produce and revise polished work, but hasn't developed the underlying critical thinking that writing cultivates in many different fields. And at worst, well, they aren't really learning anything at all. So that's a foundational concern for many of the writing faculty. Teaching public speaking has its own issues, so we talked with Joe LaBarbera, professor of speech, to get his thoughts.
There's an old expression. When I took a computer programming class back in the early 80s, right, my undergraduate, we had an expression called GIGO, G-I-G-O, and it's garbage in, garbage out. And that's what the acronym is for, GIGO. That's especially critical for artificial intelligence because the training data for AI has to be accurate. It has to be comprehensive, and it has to be unbiased. And there's no way to know if it actually is until you use it. And again, that's where the former television news reporter in me and journalist comes in, is AI doesn't always pass the smell test at every level, which is why, to me, AI is just another technology that I could take or leave in the classroom. Now, that's quite divergent because there are people who will criticize you for not embracing AI and using it in the classroom. To me, it's like, not so fast. Just because it's there doesn't mean that we have to use it. I mean, AI is a part of our lives, whether we want to recognize that or not. But like any technology, we should be aware of its existence, how it impacts us, and how we choose to use it. That should be up to us. And that includes teachers. My personal perspective, I believe AI is leading to the dumbing down of society because it removes a lot of those critical thinking skills that are so important for young people. But you can't, just like when you're flying an airplane, you can't let the airplane get ahead of you. I had a flight instructor who told me, don't let the airplane fly you, you fly the airplane. And that's where we're at with AI in the classroom. You need to make sure that you are controlling AI and AI is not controlling you. There are a lot of problems that we can come up with when using AI. I mean, Siri, GPS, AI, to me, all artificial intelligence gets in the way of critical thinking skills, even when they're used with some thought. So we don't need to avoid embracing AI, but we also don't need to believe that it's something bigger or larger than it is. That's really important, because just because it's there doesn't mean we have to use it. Just think of it like a GPS on the car. Growing up, I knew how to read a map, and I could look at a map and go, okay, this is how I'm getting from point A to point B, and then I would drive without having to look at a map again. Now I'll have my GPS on my phone, or I'll look at it, but what will I do with that GPS? And just because tools exist doesn't mean you have to use them. And to me, your AI concern level should be commensurate with what you're training or trying to educate your students to do. If we're teaching tactics and techniques that can be the difference between life and death, we may need to be a little bit more concerned about AI in the classroom, for example, fire academy or the nursing school or something where, we're talking about life and death. In an introduction to broadcasting class, the amount of AI that's used or not used, or if we detect it, or if it gets by us, or however, that's not really a life and death student. Back to speech class, students learn when delivering speeches. They learn to manage something we call communication apprehension or public speaking anxiety. AI doesn't really help them with that. It doesn't help them manage anxiety during speech. It's just knowledge. They tell them how to manage it, but it's the practical knowledge of that application in the classroom that really is important, including adapting to an audience during a speech. AI, again, cannot replicate the physiological changes that happen to you during a speech. So, for example, if a student gives a speech and then we're giving feedback to that student, we can do, whether it's one-on-one or in a classroom, we can say, hey, look, how did you feel it went? And they'll I got really nervous right after this or right before. I go, okay, so what did you do to combat that? And how? Those are things that AI just doesn't do as well as when they're happening synchronous live. Even if you write something, if you record something and you're like, I was nervous at this point, it just doesn't do the same thing that a real person can do. And maybe that's because the emotion is often out of it. And the compassion and sometimes the subtleties and nuances that are needed in human communication to make a real difference.
Again, that was Professor LaBarbera expressing some of the concerns cropping up in the classroom. But while faculty struggle about what to do with certain classwork, there are some administrators at the college finding immediate practical applications with AI. One of them is Max Zuccallo. Chapter 3, Institutional Intelligence.
We can use AI to set the parameters of any question or any decision that leadership makes, which I'm a part of that process now, through the lens of what aligns with our policies at FSCJ as far as the CBA and as far as the APM. You can put in any policy. So basically the way he was explaining it to me is, think about it this way. You can set OpenAI to be your policy by giving it the actual policy of the college, putting that information into OpenAI. AI then uses that information, right, to read through the policy itself and then provide you with, this is the correct answer based off the policy for what your employee is asking.
Max Zuccallo, an instructional program manager in our Culinary Arts and Hospitality program, has developed a system that demonstrates how AI can streamline operations. He's developed a decision-making flowchart that aligns with institutional information that would normally take days or months to figure out. So his approach shows how AI can free up time while ensuring consistent application of policies across the department.
I kind of tested this out. Let's just start with that to give us all a real world example. So I went with some elaborate question to Chef Grigsby, and 45 minutes later, he was done explaining the answer, and we had a full clarification because it was in depth. I then took that same question and put it into ChatGPT. I provided it with I didn't set the model to be OpenAI you can set it as, this is how you will answer every question, but I just provided it with a snippet of the APM or the CBA where it was being discussed.
Okay.
And so I said, basically, based off this CBA policy, This is the question. What is the alignment and what is the action step that's needed? What's the decision basically that should be taken in this situation? And about 15 seconds later, not 45 minutes later, it gave me the exact same answer that Chef Grigsby had provided. People are busy, right? You can't always just go into your faculty, go into your boss's office, go into human resources and say, hey, I've got this elaborate question. I need this answered today, in the next 5 minutes, because all of these people are doing their normal job functions. All of this at one time, that's these squares below, it was all just a mess of notes in my computer, essentially. And so what it did was it first put everything organized into these 5 buckets to make sure that we had everything prioritized correctly. And then from there, I asked it to provide me with a code for creating a visual syntax flowchart, which is what you're looking at right now. So once I put that in, it actually wrote the code, which you can see over here. Let me click on this editor. So right here on the left side, can you see this where it says onboarding?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is the actual code for the flowchart right here. This was created by ChatGPT with the prompts that I had provided it. And so basically it gave me this entire flowchart from top to bottom. And then I took this flowchart and I partnered that with going to this mermaid chart, because it was free, mermaidchart.com. So I was looking for a free syntax flowchart editor. I put the flowchart in from GPT, thinking, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but let's just see once I put this in here. And then lo and behold, when you go to your whiteboard and actually visually represents it for you, all of these shapes and this information came out, and I was able to then customize it as far as how it looks with the colors and some of the finer details of it. The gray boxes, for example, you can all customize all of this. AI is connected into everything. Every single person that is putting anything at all into OpenAI is feeding into AI. So it has, your brain only has so many neurons, right? AI has the neurons of every single brain that's being put into it. So it's important to remember that it's not a tool, it's a partner. And with a partner, there's a true alignment that needs to happen along with some guidelines and some boundaries, right? And so I think from a safety and security protocol standpoint, what I would recommend is that we are on the very cutting edge of this technology, and we don't really have the parameters set for people's personal information, people's financial information, as you were mentioning, sensitive information. If all of this is being fed in, your DNA is being fed in, your test results are being fed in by your doctor into an algorithm, then AI already has that information about you, right? Whether or not you even realize that AI has your human blueprint element of DNA with it, it does.
This last comment makes me think about Yuval Noah Harari's ideas on what exactly AI is. Perhaps he suggests it's more of an alien intelligence, meaning it can create its own ideas without humans. Harari is the author of Nexus, which is an incredible history of human networks that comes with a critical warning about AI. In an interview recently, he reiterates one of his big ideas. He says AI is different from any other technology previously invented. It's not a tool, but an independent agent. Any previous technology, like the atomic bomb, had huge power, but was in the hands of human beings who decided the use of the bomb and where. The bomb could not decide nor invent any new strategic weapon. So with that in mind, let's return to our Frankenstein analogy. Although we may not feel we are the makers of this tech, nor can we control it, educators do have a responsibility in providing guidance and training around it. As an institutional community, we are creating something together. And what it becomes really depends on how much we choose to investigate and to understand it. It also, in part, depends on our relationship to our students when it comes to technology. Chapter 4, the students. So now let's turn to the classroom and see what some of our students are doing. David Singletary, professor of computer science, is directly involving students in developing AI applications. He's been leading a project that bridges technology and accessibility by partnering with our American Sign Language program. In these photos, if you're watching the YouTube version, these students were using MediaPipe, and this is a library that supports hand landmark tracking, which can be used to create an AI application in Python that will recognize ASL fingerspelling. So it recognizes specific points on the student's hands or landmarks, finger joints, fingertips, and wrists. From this application, the students can create a labeled image dataset of hand gestures, which constitute finger-spelled letters in ASL. And so this can be used to train a machine learning model. David says this is an IT elective for our AS and Computer Information Technology students. He says the goal is for students to learn the basics of ASL, computer vision, and machine learning. And I think this project really exemplifies the interdisciplinary potential of AI on campus. It's not just theoretical learning, it's applied innovation with real-world impact for the deaf community. Now, let's turn to a few more student experiences. This first one is a digital media student, and she's already working in film and videography. Full disclosure, she's also my daughter, so let's hear from Alexis Stuart about the impact of AI in her classes.
I'm Alexis. I am pursuing a bachelor's degree in digital media at FSCJ. I hope to start my own business and really just utilize the tools and the methods that are taught to me to employ that in my own videography business or digital marketing business.
So over the past year or so, has AI changed anything about how you do school?
I mean, rudimentary AI tools like caption generation has really changed the way that I edit videos. Like, I'm currently editing a video right now. Before I got on this call, I used the new AI function in Premiere, relatively new in the last couple years. And it just generates captions for me, and I can go through and edit them, and that saves me hours of work. Okay, so I took a Web 2.0 class, which is not about coding, even though that's what it sounds like. It's social media campaigns, basically,
Okay.
like how to navigate social media. So I had an assignment where we did have to pick one of 3 brands that the professor had offered up. I think it was like an outdoor, they're pre-existing companies. So like Patagonia, Duolingo, and then maybe another tech company. And we had to create a brand guide and a social media campaign for these companies. A brand guide, at the time, the assignment is pretty exhaustive. Like it's over a 20-page kind of manual on how this company might post over the course of a month and sticking with the company's font and the company's colors. And so since a lot of that content is brand specific to a pre-existing brand, I use ChatGPT to come up with the actual text that I would put in each maybe social media post. Because as a graphic designer, which is really what the course is geared towards, it's not so much my job to come up with the rhetoric of a company, job to like come up with these slogans, catchy words. It's more so about the aesthetic of the company and designing in these design programs. So I would use ChatGPT to generate the actual content of each post, but then I would put one in Photoshop that's, designing the pictures or designing the graphics and then putting it all together in a visually appealing brand book for the final project. I don't think, in that same course, if I was asked to come up with a whole new, company and come up with the wording that company would use, I don't think that I would go to ChatGPT for that because I would want it to be very organic. I think daily usage, like day-to-day use, the most like common way of me using it is like meal planning, shopping lists, budgeting. It's really useful for, just like ChatGPT.
Do you use it for travel?
Oh my gosh. I actually used it on my last big trip to California. I had it draw up an itinerary so that I could be most efficient with like my money and planning on a hour by hour basis in places that I wasn't going to be for a long time and, that I was completely unfamiliar with. So that was very useful. I think a lot of my fears come from the natural human fear of change and progression and how this is going to make so many creative jobs obsolete because it's going to be so much more cost effective for giant corporations to assign this kind of work to AI and machines and creative work to machines rather than to creatives. I also think but that can be good because it can also create new jobs and new roles for people that are going to manage the AI. I also think there's a level of fear behind utilizing AI and things and kind of going back to what you were talking about with the product being a part of the process, like those two things being really interlinked. And when you start taking out too many steps, you start to lose some of the organicness of art. Yeah. I think that there's certain things that AI could never replace or shouldn't, but people will try to use AI to replace for like these in films. Like I don't think that AI has any place in that in actually like generating the ideas. But I think that, corporations will try to do that and take shortcuts in that way.
And let's not forget our Applied AI degree, which we featured in episode 8. This is FSCJ's program designed to prepare students for real-world AI applications. So we interviewed a couple of students from this program. What you're going to hear now is James Higbee and his son AJ. They are both enrolled in this AS program, and right now they're taking Professor Shakia Riggins' Applied AI course.
I choose to be an AI optimist, right? And I think that's a choice that we get to make. I haven't worked in talent and technology for a long, long time. I don't see it as a replacement to jobs. I see it as an opportunity to reskill and upskill themselves and put themselves in better positions to compete in so many ways. Mine's admittedly a bit different because companies have massive amounts of money. They have the ability to lobby governmental decisions. The only thing that I think can really stop it is government. And quite frankly, they're in it, right? They're bought in. Yeah, not only are they bought in, but I also think I almost prefer a corporatocracy to a governmental thing. So I'm in philosophy this year, right? And I would have found that class to be very difficult if it weren't for AI specifically, because I can take the text that my teacher's wanting me to read, plug it into AI so it knows the information, and then I just ask it questions. From there, I'm able to not only learn about the text, but also gain my own opinions on it. It was kind of talking, so he was talking to Socratic, he was talking to Aristotle and their frameworks.
So how do you use it in your everyday life, James, in your everyday professional life?
I wish I could tell you that I didn't use it all the time, but I do. I use it for so many things. Historically, the way that I approach it. Things that people commonly use it for, like replying to an email. And I don't. I actually went back to handwritten thank you or mails because it was getting so bad that it was AI and it felt really uncommon. But I will tell you that to put a persona of a researcher, or put a persona of a data analyst, or put a persona of a data scientist in as the framework, the answers that you get. So as a strategist, I go and understand the business flow of the company I'm working with. Then I go look at their data stores and then start to put together solutions. And so the AI becomes kind of the enablement layer once I understand the direction in the business, the narrative, and then pair that with the vision flow. So for me, AI becomes a researcher. It's to borrow Carl Robinson's term, it's agentic, right? I have an agent that does my research and an agent that helps me with my outline and an agent that helps with making sure that the language is appropriate for the audience. All of those things you could do yourself. You have to know the content for it and able to do it. But something that would take an hour takes minutes.
So as we continue hearing about what's happening in the classroom, let's turn to the computer science department. Before AI was mainstream, it lived in the imaginations of theorists and the code of early computer scientists. Professor Ron Bendelli began working with computers in the 1990s when machine learning was still emerging and the internet was just beginning to shape the world. His career bridges the early foundations of computing with today's evolving landscape of artificial intelligence.
AI has been around for many, many years. And when I first got in the industry back in the 90s, the early 90s, they were always talking about, oh, we're going to have AI, it's going to be doing stuff. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. Sure. That's really going to happen. But when I got in and started exploring it, my mind immediately went to all the different possibilities of how it could be used, especially in the educational arena. I think that potentially the scenes you described where some bot teaches the course, I think that could happen. It's not going to happen, I don't think, in the next 10 years, 20 years, but maybe 30, 40 years, I think we'll get to that point. Just like we're getting to cars driving now, right? By themselves. So I think we'll get there ultimately. And I don't know that I want it to happen, but I think in the near term, let me just give you an example. I teach a course called CGS 1100, which is microcomputer applications for business and economics or something like that. And basically, I use AI teaches the course right now. Basically, AI does everything. It gives them a textbook. They follow the instructions in the follow the instructions in the textbook. And then when they submit it, it grades it instantly and gives them instant feedback. And yet here I am teaching that course.
Yeah.
Why am I teaching that course? Because somebody has to set that up. Somebody has to set up the guardrails and assist the students in questions where they don't understand things. And so I think there'll always be a need for professors. But like you said, in that course, my students learn so much more than if I taught it manually. There's no way I could get across to them what they need to know. And also they can do it at their own pace. Whereas if I'm teaching it manually, then they have to follow along and I'm teaching to the slowest person in the class. In my 2 analysis and design courses that I typically teach each semester, they have 7 authentic learning task assignments. And across 2 courses, I usually have about 40 to 50 students each semester. I give feedback on every assignment to every student in both courses. It takes me approximately 15 minutes to grade a student's assignment. So 15 times 50 times 7, that's how much time I'm spending giving this individual feedback to students. Now, some like it, some call me anal, some call me OCD. Call me what you want. You're getting the best I got. Okay. They're getting everything from me that I can give them. But I would love to be able to give that to ChatGPT, for example, or a local LLM. And now I don't even know what 15 minutes times 50 times 2 or times 7 is, whatever that number is. I'd like all that time back. Yeah. If you look at human evolution in the industrial age, it's kind of like, what did the first cars look like? They didn't even have tops. They didn't even have windshields. And so as human beings used them and explored with them, we've developed now what we have now. And I think the same thing is going to happen here.
I think that this ambiguity, this not knowing exactly what we're dealing with, might be the defining feature of this moment. Where are we exactly in this evolution of industry? To further Professor Bendelli's analogy, do we have seatbelts in place yet for our AI experience? Many would argue we need a lot more guardrails and we need a lot more safety features. And for better or worse, this seems like just one big experiment. Chapter 5, the lesson, perhaps. So we're piecing together something new from fragments of human knowledge. But unlike Dr. Frankenstein's isolated laboratory, Our experiment is happening everywhere, and it feels like all at once. In writing classrooms and in culinary kitchens, in administrative offices and digital media studios. There's no single creator, no single creation. Just thousands of interactions that are bringing something new into being. Without much regulation, it seems. We're all contributing to a massive network of data that may soon have a life of its own. We may not be able to see the whole picture because we're all working on different parts. But I guess that's how all tech revolutions are. The code writers, the teachers, the everyday users, we're all contributing to something whose final form none of us can predict. So as we wrap up this series, let's hear from a few of our past guests.
The first time I used ChatGPT, I was absolutely horrified. I was so worried about it. I remember just using it for half an hour and just becoming more and more depressed by it and just seeing what this program can do. And I actually turned to my wife, who was sitting on the other side of the table, and I said to her that the worst thing just happened. I just found the future of plagiarism. And it was so bad that I actually put the program completely aside for a few weeks. And I went back to it and I tried to think about it as a learner. I tried to just say, I'm not going to think about it as a professor. I'm not going to worry about the writing part. Just going to kind of table that. I'm just going to think about what I can teach myself. And that's when things started to shift for me.
If you look at it, it boils down to we can't really detect it. We can't really prevent it because these are tools they use at home and it's a take-home essay. So you can't prevent it. There's also some evidence that the students cannot be convinced to skip it. There's a survey from about a year ago, a national survey where about 50% of students said that they would use AI tools for writing, even when told not to by the instructor.
So to answer your question, while we keep a critical eye on the ethical concerns that we should keep on our radar, here's where I would go with this. If we're not helping our students learn how to use AI in appropriate, thoughtful, and responsible ways, we are doing them a disservice. They will be on the back foot when it comes to the job market. And more importantly, I believe that as we are navigating this time as a society, as educators, we have an opportunity to develop engaged citizens in our classes. We all need to be developing greater literacy, greater fluency, greater awareness of how these tools are shaping and impacting our day-to-day experiences.
There's an interesting discussion on LinkedIn this morning about how maybe we need to step away from the idea of AI as a democratizer because these paid programs exist and they have way better tools than the free versions, right? And I agree with that part. I do. But I also think that there are some spaces where maybe AI can help to democratize things. Maybe I'm still really optimistic about that.
Like, I think lifelong learning would be a societal good. But we live in a capitalist society, and who pays for that? That's one of the big questions that I have. And that's one of the big questions I think any university would have. It's unlikely it's going to come from federal government subsidies. So I have to make my own network and figure out those things on my own. I'm a curious person, so that ends up not being a hindrance for me. For other people who maybe were sold on this idea that you go to college, you get a job, and then you're all right. Life just kind of moves at its pace. I think there's a lot of potential heartache and disappointment for people who were sold that and bought it. Because I just don't think that's the world that we're going into. I think we could be looking at that type of shock and letdown that factory workers had in the 80s and 90s, especially after NAFTA, when, the acceleration of offshoring happened. There's no reason to think that can't also happen for white collar jobs and for creative jobs. So my advice has been pretty constant for a very long time when I'm talking to young people. It's not impacted by technology because technology comes and goes. What I tell everybody is your network is what makes you thrive. And whenever you can do a favor for somebody, do a favor for somebody. Maybe 10% of the time you get that back. But that 10%, that's really going to be when it matters for you. And you don't know which 10% is going to be the one that you need and when you need it. So much about networking is about trust
and it's about kindness. And I think those are just two like really good human values to reinforce. So, you know, it doesn't matter if you're in tech or if you're in business, advocacy or lobbying, like to me, like your success depends on your network, which depends on building trust and deploying kindness.
As always, education must evolve alongside technology. And as we move through these changes, the lessons of the Industrial Revolution remain important. The Luddites weren't wrong to worry about their livelihoods. Their concerns were legitimate. Their story reminds us that progress must take into account human welfare and job preparation. In our applied AI program here at the college and in the plans for an autonomous vehicle training center, we're already making efforts to ensure our community isn't left behind as students prepare for jobs that don't even exist yet. As our AI systems continue to evolve through our interactions, we should remember our responsibility as creators and as educators. Unlike Dr. Frankenstein, we can't abandon the creation to figure out its own moral compass. We must guide it and ensure it serves human flourishing rather than destruction. This is Sarah Stuart, signing off on our final episode of AI Goes to College. Please join the conversation by reaching out to me or leaving your comments below. Thank you for listening.